All right, we have a little bit different of a show because John Brackney has lost his voice, so he got everything prepped for us. But I guess I'm supposed to do the intro for both of us. So I'll introduce our guest here, Professor Derek Katzum of the University of Texas Permian Basin. And full disclosure, Professor Katzum is one of my closest friends. He's basically a brother to me, even though we disagree on many things politically. I would just say on the surface, we don't. We disagree loudly about things that are less significant than the things that we agree on fundamentally. But it will sound sometimes like we really disagree with each other. And I don't know if you want to respond to that intro, or if there's anything you want to add. Is it okay if I call you Derek? I
Yeah,
don't.
let's I don't
This is
I
the
don't
idea of calling you Professor Katzum for an hour. It's
yeah, no,
bizarre
no,
to.
I'm not calling you Professor Tootle. No, we'll go
Yeah,
with
thank
Derek.
you. Yeah,
We'll,
that
we'll
would be
we'll go with
good.
Derek and Steve. We've been friends long enough that we know each other's deepest, darkest, and
Yeah.
yeah,
I was trying to, let's do the math here. Like, have we been friends for, it's 26 years?
26, 25. I don't remember when, if it was
Uh,
98 or
yeah,
99 when you got to.
98 was when I
Yeah.
it went. So, and but maybe were you not in Ohio for one year? Like, I think you did it a year abroad in Africa or something.
I was in South Africa in 97. I got there in 98.
Oh, okay.
I
So,
got
yeah.
there in 98 in the winter term. Remember we had that bizarre trimester system that I always forget about.
Yeah,
And then you got there in the fall of 98, and I was
yeah.
just getting back into I was jumping back into the Contemporary History Institute because they didn't want me in to have it split up between two groups.
Right, right, right. No, so yeah, so 26 years. So there's a lot of history between the two of us, including the fact that we are both, history professors. So Brackney wanted to bring us together because of a Substack that you wrote. And maybe we'll just get this kicked off by having you summarize give me your 90 seconds or three or four bullet points on this Substack you wrote about Harris's victory.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's going to kick his ass. I do, and I get it. Like, I also am a liberal college professor, and I get all the stereotypes that comes with it. But I mean, I've been looking at elections long enough. I've been doing live election night coverage on the local Fox and ABC affiliate, which work together for every election since I've been here, or at least every election since 2008. And I'm pretty good at playing the role of analyst. I'm stealing my Bill Luchtenberg hat, who used to do that for NBC. Um, and so I think I'm pretty good. Like when I teach my modern presidency and presidential elections class every time, I ask my students, and in the McCain Obama election, I asked them, who am I going to vote for? 60% thought I was voting for McCain. Um, Even in 2016, there were students who were stunned that I was voting for Hillary once I said, after, way at the end, after everything was due and all that. I I I think I'm pretty good at not wearing my sort of, well, for one thing, if you're a historian and who writes about civil rights and apartheid and the kind of things that I do, your team Democrat hat is a little bit like me being a Red Sox fan, right? I got to inherit a long tradition of racial problems. And it's the same thing with the Democratic Party. I mean, it's why I'm
By the
more of
way,
a
let's
lib.
pause. That's a great history joke, by the way. If any, if people need to pause and appreciate what a great history joke that is. All right, sorry, go
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. So I mean, I'm more team liberal than I am team team Democrat in a lot of ways. But I just think that, look, I will almost guarantee one thing, right? She's going to kick his ass in the popular vote. There's not much question about that. I mean, look, let's look back to the relevant elections, right? Since 1988. Now, in 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush stomped on Dukakis, largely following in the legacy of Reagan. The one thing I've said over the years is that if Reagan, Clinton, and Obama could have won for third terms, they all would have won third terms. I don't have any doubt about that because Reagan, no real question. Clinton, he would have covered up all of the mistakes, despite the nightmare that he was in by the end of his presidency. He
Well,
would
and
have
he
done
also
camp.
wouldn't have done a lot of the seedy. People kind of forget that a lot of the worst stuff that Clinton did, he did after the election. So he probably
Yeah,
would have done those things.
Well, and he would have campaigned
Yeah,
in
and he
two
would
or
have
three
campaigned, and yeah, right, exactly.
in
No,
two or three of the states that Gore lost, and I mean he would have been great at it. Gore was such a technocrat, right? And then
it
Obama.
was
I
such
mean,
a
come
close election. You can't say like, of course, Clinton would have gotten like 800 more votes than Gore.
right, yeah, yeah.
I
And
mean,
then
yeah, I think that one's a slam dunk. Yeah, and I think you're right about Obama.
oh, Obama.
Also,
Obama
yeah.
stomps every strength he has plays into it in a way that Hillary doesn't. And also
Oh yeah,
Obama campaigns in Michigan and Pennsylvania and all that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I don't. I mean, I think that because of the way the economy happened, that's not the case with the other two-term president, right? George W. Bush. And so as I look at the popular vote, even when there was pluralities. Clinton 92 reasonably comfortably, Clinton 96 more comfortably. I mean, 8 points. Gore by a modest number in terms of the popular vote in 2000. Bush does win the popular vote and somewhat comfortably. And we've reached a point now in American politics where 3% is a pretty comfortable margin.
Oh
We're
yeah. I
done
mean,
the
our elections are decided by 50 to 80,000 votes,
Yeah, no, yeah,
which is
because of
insane.
and look, before anyone I love how people think they're giving a clever gotcha to a professional historian about the Electoral College. I'm familiar, right? But my point being that part of the ass kicking comes in the form of a lot more people wanted candidate X than candidate Y. And that has
Mhm.
been consistently the case, especially in the election since 2004. I mean, Obama won by a near landslide in 2008, a very comfortable margin in 2012. Hillary won by about 2% in 2016. Gore kicked his ass in 2020, and now we have this one. And I just don't see where there are more votes. So the real question about my piece is the Electoral College. What happens in the 7 states that are going to make the difference in this election? And at least from what I'm seeing, I'm seeing the same dynamics as 2020, but better for the Democrats. I'm not seeing a single environment of those states that is clearly better for Trump. I'm not seeing a single one that's clearly better. Maybe Michigan, only if you have either Jill Stein getting votes or the Dearborn's population, that 2% or whatever, not showing up. But I don't see a single state where the situation's better.
So, two questions for you. First, do you see any, or what odds would you give, just gut odds, on Harris losing the popular vote?
12%.
And do you see any path for victory for Harris if she doesn't win Pennsylvania and North Carolina?
But that's where it becomes hard, right? I mean, that question in a vacuum, probably not. However, one of the things that is telling to me right now is the way that the sides seem to be. I have never seen so many Democratic presidential candidate ads in West Texas as I'm seeing right now. Now, I don't watch, I don't watch any. I have to admit, don't watch any 24-hour news channel. So I don't know what's going on in that context. But I mean, I am seeing pro Harris ads. I never saw Obama ads. Now I turn them the second they're on. I have no idea if these ads are any good, if they're bad or whatever. The minute I see an ad, I turn it on principle, even if
Well, I
it's a
mean,
football.
far be it from me from a great distance to tell you about Texas politics, but do you I have two possible answers for that. Number one, they have so much money, they have to do something with it.
Yeah.
Number two, you actually have a pretty competitive Senate race that where you
Yeah.
want to make sure and increase turnout and keep your voters energized, because you don't want a lack of enthusiasm
Right.
making you lose that Senate seat. By the way, and I
Right.
don't, just as an aside, I mean, where do you see that Cruz? I mean, you think it's possible that he loses?
Uh, so Democrats have been hinching their hat on that dream for so long because Ted Cruz is such a singularly unlikable human being that people want to see his defeat just as a function of seeing him humiliated. I don't know. I think Allred has a better chance than the previous folks. I think that Allred has a certain level of appeal built in. I think Allred, I mean, absolutely just pummeled him in that debate the other night. I don't know if that makes a difference, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are watching the Texas senatorial debate. I haven't spoken to a person who actually watched it other than seeing some clips. Um, so I don't know, but of course those two things go hand in hand because we weren't seeing it for O'Rourke, and we weren't seeing it for, so in other words, yeah, that's possible, but since it's the same voting pool, raising one raises the other. I haven't seen as much, and what that means to me is that there's a certain level of belief that, my goodness, because as we all know, right, if Texas were to go to Harris, this is going to look a lot more like 84 than it's going to look like
Well,
2004.
I actually think it's much more likely that you would end up with a crazy result of like Trump winning the presidency and uh, Cruz losing the Senate. I'd give that a 17% chance of happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. I think he really is a truly unlikable person, and Allred was able to get him. I mean, because here's the thing. One of my sort of these ideas of masculinity on the right, Colin Allred would stomp a mud hole into Ted Cruz. So Ted Cruz can't pull any of the masculine nonsense with a former NFL player, right?
Yeah,
He can't pull any of the masculine nonsense with a guy who would dribble him like a basketball.
yeah.
And that's I mean, look, okay, should that be the way our politics go? No, but if you're going to flirt in the dirt, then don't be surprised when someone's willing to get dirtier than you, especially when they can beat your ass.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about seeing those two on stage with one another is Cruz looked literally scared.
Well,
The
and again, this is my view from a distance here, is that enthusiastic voters only get to vote once. And there might be a lot of people in Texas who are vocal about loving Donald Trump, but there might be a lot of people who do, well, maybe I should save this, but there might be some people in Texas who undervote to
yeah,
send a message that they don't like Trump and still vote Republican down ticket or stay home because they don't think it's necessary, and Democratic enthusiasts. So we might see some split ticket voters in Texas. I'm just saying it's a possibility.
or a split ticket or leaving blank.
Yeah, or leaving blank undervotes. Yeah,
I could see an element of that. Yeah, enthusiastic voters only get to vote once, but unenthusiastic voters cannot vote infinite times.
yeah,
And
right.
so
That's what I'm saying. Like, I just think that there might be people who are not particularly enthusiastic about voting for Trump, and thus don't vote at all because his supporters are low propensity voters. And if you don't get if you have non-enthusiastic low propensity voters, it drives down Republican down ticket voting,
right. Yeah.
whereas enthusiastic Democratic voters are going to make sure and get their ballots in. Um, so even if they aren't particularly enthusiastic about Harris.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're telling me I have to bet my music collection on the Cruz Allred race, I am probably, and you know how close I'm going to hold that to myself
Yeah,
as a value. I'm probably going to say Cruz will edge it out in the closest one he's had.
yeah,
But since I don't have to do that, I think there is a possibility. Now,
yeah,
again, I this is where it's really different in the sense of enthusiasm from state to state. But I would guess that it could serve as a bellwether if Cruz were to go down. You got to wonder, because the one thing I don't really say in that is that I think the Senate still looks like it's probably going to be okay. I think Republicans are going to take it by one, or it's going to be 50-50. And I think that the House has a real legitimate chance to go Democratic, and that raises all kinds of really
yeah.
interesting things.
But the reason I was saying that the thing about the popular vote, maybe not going to Harris, is because in being in California, you would not even know that there's a presidential race going on.
Right.
Like there's no Democratic campaigning going on. I mean, the Senate, Adam Schiff, I've never seen a single ad or a single sign for him because he's up by 30 points over
Right.
Garvey. So um, So if there is a depressed Democratic turnout in California, it might actually lead to Harris, you know, losing the popular vote. Because if especially if this is one of those races where it's 500,000 one way or the other, and you,
Yeah,
you lose.
I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Now, again, the electoral college is the thing.
Yeah,
And there are a number of factors that could play into that, including, a whole host of voter suppression shenanigans and all that kind of thing. But I'm going to stand by the article. Now, look, I mean, the funny thing is that the only place I really saw a reaction to it, I'm relatively new to my Substack. I'm not getting a ton of comments. Subscribers need to blah blah blah, but please do. Um,
I do read
it's
it, by the way. I don't. Even though I don't comment, I do read your Substack. It is
yeah.
worth.
I
It's
mean,
good.
I'm not afraid to be wrong. What I find amazing is the sort of dickish certainty that I was wrong by people commenting on places where it's been posted. I find it really interesting that it is controversial to say that third time around when there are legitimate rumors coming from his own people that Trump is literally shitting himself on stage. It's possible that he could, for the third time in a row, lose the popular vote. Like, I find it astounding that people are flabbergasted by that. And look, it's a Trump thing, in the sense that I would not be as confident. I mean, who knows how it would have all played out, but I would not be as confident if Nikki Haley were the nominee. I would not be as
Oh,
confident
yeah.
if
I think if Nikki Haley were the nominee, she would be winning this election.
I think it'd
I
be
mean, who
really
knows how the
interesting.
campaign would have unfolded, but it would have been just a completely different
Right, right. You
electoral
can't,
map
I mean,
too.
you
Like
can't,
that shakes the snow globe so much that
right.
um,
Yeah.
who knows? It would have reverted to being 2004's electoral map or something.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know because, again, the sort of big stage thing. I mean, she has a lot of weaknesses too, but they're
Yeah,
not weaknesses of her like running the risk of. I mean, the Republic would go on, right? We all would have survived a, Al Gore presidency. If you're Republican, you know, you would have survived an Al Gore presidency. I
yeah,
survived a George W. Bush presidency. I would have survived a McCain or a Romney presidency. The Republic would have gone on and things would have
right.
been fine because, I still think there's something, and I think that's where the norms of Trumpism have really undercut thing of sort of something of a vital center in
Okay.
American politics, and not in the sense of like these people who claim to simply be centrists, because a lot of
Yeah,
times centrists just haven't bothered caring about things.
right.
Centrism is on a lot of these issues. What do you mean by center?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that there's I heard maybe the first theory of this election that made sense to me this morning, and it was somebody repeating something Jonah Goldberg had said. It was Sarah Isgur repeating something Jonah Goldberg had said, which was that that voters are voting on what they consider to be their best case and worst case scenarios for both candidates. And it seems like sometimes Harris doesn't benefit from that. So, in other words, if you're voting for Trump, you're voting for the best case scenario of Trump, you know.
right.
And if you're voting against Trump, you're voting against the worst case scenario for Trump. And I thought that's maybe the
Well,
best summary of, you know,
so here's one of the things I suspect, even without getting into the merits of the argument. I suspect that we are going to get a lot of women turning out. And I think in a lot of states, we're going to get a lot of women turning out and being like, oh, that Harris. Oh my God, the Democrats. Oh my God, murdering babies. And then getting in there and thinking of their daughters and granddaughters and pulling the lever, as it were, to use a rather a dated metaphor in the early
yeah,
part of the last
yeah,
century, pull the trigger for Kamala Harris.
could be.
Uh, I mean, I think that that's going to be because uh, uh, the some both the horror stories and also a sense of sort of backsliding. And we're getting I think we're getting a little subtle push from our producer to
Yeah,
weigh in
yeah.
on issues, but it's not. I mean, how issue oriented an election has it been, right? Because here's the telling thing for me. on the hierarchy of Democratic interests, if you listen to Republicans, you would think that advocacy of trans athletes in sports is high on the Democratic agenda. And it's not. My view on trans, I'm not a big fan of 15-year-olds killing themselves. And I think we should do things to make sure that doesn't happen. And when it comes to trans athletes, I find it fascinating. People who couldn't name a single woman's athlete suddenly finding themselves the big defenders of women's sports, by the way. But beyond that, fine. If that's an issue, but that's not anywhere near up on the hierarchy. It's not going to be something that the Democrats are deeply committed to. And in the meantime, we're not talking about arresting Google, CBS, ABC, NBC, and now apparently after the Kamala Harris thing the other day, Fox, and so on and so forth, and then claiming the other side of being anti-free speech, right? Like there are elements of Trump's authoritarianism that are neither right nor left. They're simply authoritarian.
Well, that's actually a nice transition for how I wanted to get to the next, big thing we're supposed to address, which is how would you place this choice between Harris and Trump historically, if you are considering it strictly through the lens of big liberalism and big conservatism? The broadest definitions of liberalism, the broadest definitions of conservatism, historically speaking. How should a liberal, taking again, I want you to take the 100-year view, not the,
Yeah.
and the conservative, the 100-year view of conservatism. How should a liberal and a conservative view these two candidates?
Here's what I'm going to speak to Trump first, in part because I've been thinking about conservatism a lot, in part because, that's the other thing that amazes me about the sort of outrage on Facebook about something that I wrote is that, and this isn't my sort of, I have black friends thing, but literally my four best friends in American academia are all George H.W. Bush conservatives or conservatives on sort of certain elements of foreign policy, right? Like our friend Tom Brusino, my friend Bill Harlow, and my friend Zero Eldridge. Those are four of my six best friends, with two of my
I was
best
going to
friends
say
right
Jaime.
there.
I didn't want you to out Jaime. I was like, what? I don't, because
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know Jaime in
no,
context.
yeah, and these are, and then Jaime it would be the in that top five, and he's the
Yeah,
only
yeah.
one who doesn't fit that. But almost all of them have either decided, yeah, I can't tell you how many of my friends believe that the biggest miss in American political life was George H.W. Bush not winning in 1992.
So,
Um,
first of all, you're right. That is incredibly insightful. I trace so many problems with the American political tradition to the 1992 election. Yeah, so agree 1,000% that you have characterized me correctly.
right,
So no,
and
for
I know I've characterized my friend Bill Harlow correctly, and then they'd probably agree on the 92 election because of the sort of my team, but then um, with Tom and Zero, and then obviously Jaime and me on the other side, you get to a sort of element of, okay, so these are people who are legitimate conservatives, right? And they believe in relatively small government. They, for some, my two Texas friends, but I also know for you and Tom, like Second Amendment is a big deal, but I think you're willing to entertain sort of reasonable interpretation since it does start with a dependent clause that must mean something, right? Um, but you know, I grew up in a hunting family. I grew up with gun cabinets. I grew up with stepfathers with handguns in the closet that we knew were right. You're curious because you're not afraid of, or guns aren't this like mystifying thing. The idea that I'm painted as anti-Second Amendment is people seeing what they want to see, right? And that's some Far Side character come to life in one of John's Facebook posts. Just went through a litany of unoriginal ideas that he read on Twitter and decided he was a clever guy. But the reality is that Trump is almost sui generis. Is my legit conservative friends? I won't speak for you, but I have another one who's like, I don't have a party anymore because my
that's what
party.
I was gonna ask you because I've already mailed in my ballot. Can you guess what I did?
So it's either going to be, I mean, the obvious thing to say was you left President blank, and voted down ticket would be what I would probably guess.
You
I
are
could
correct.
see it. I
That
could
is
see
what I
it.
did.
That is what you did. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I,
So
right.
that's exactly what I did.
Whereas I think Kamala Harris fits into a long-standing range of whatever American liberalism is.
Well, that's why I
Uh,
was going to ask you if you thought I was a hypocrite for not voting for Harris, because this is the thing that I sound like the because every time I started, I mean, I sat there with the pin hovering over the bubble in California, and I kept telling myself, let me give you my best argument for why I should have voted for Harris, which is that if I really find Trump to be a unique threat to the continued existence of the United States, I would be duty bound to um, do everything possible to make sure that he didn't win the election, including voting for Harris, even in a state I knew that that she was going to win. And the fact that um, I don't live in a battleground state doesn't absolve me of the moral responsibility of voting against Trump. And that's the thing that kept my pen hovering over the bubble. I don't know if you want to condemn me morally for that.
no, look, if you were in Pennsylvania or North Carolina or even Virginia, if you were in Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota, if you were in Arizona, all right, we'd have a different conversation. But I get it. I mean, it's just like in the, the you saw in like 2004, a lot of people who couldn't stomach voting for, but they traded their vote, right? I in
Yeah.
Texas will vote for Bush if you in California vote for Kerry, just as a way to be like, okay, whatever. I don't, I get it. I mean, we do, for whatever reason, tie ourselves up in these teams. And for you, for the longest time, the Republican body did was the place to go to for those conservative values that you held so strongly onto. And one would think that would have played a particular role now, would be easier to do because unlike for the vast majority of 20th century American political history, where the far right of the Democratic Party, I know we can left right as metaphor, right?
Yeah.
But whatever
Okay.
we understand as the far left and right, the right of the Democratic Party was comfortably into, and I would argue the most conservative members of the Democratic Party were the most conservative Americans. That's why the Big Tent of the Democratic Party became so problematic in the mid 20th century, right? But then you always had that left, the Rockefeller, the Bill Weld, those Republicans that went over, and parties were about more than simply ideology. And now that middle almost doesn't have a touching point anymore in most places, where if you are liberal, you are voting Democrat. If you are conservative, you're voting Republican. And I think Trump really threw that into relief. And the only way you're kind of seeing that a little bit is on uh, uh here Derek goes touching a third rail on Palestine, where you have a lot of left voters who are like, he's responsible for genocide, I can't vote for him. And that, hey, at least that's a sign of speaking out against what's supposedly your side. The same thing with those of you who are like, I can't do Trump, but I can support I can report the Republican Senate, support the Republican Senate nominee because he was a decent first baseman.
So this is the next big idea. I mean, you're transitioning perfectly between ideas. It's almost like you're an experienced broadcaster. The um, the next big transition we're supposed to make is, do we even know what these candidates stand for? Do we know what they would actually do on, we've already discussed abortion and guns, but maybe, healthcare, environment, NATO.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
I think we do. I think we have a reasonably good sense of what Harris would do. I mean, there are the platform is, for one thing, there's always an element of continuation when you're the vice president moving on. Like, was George H.W. Bush dramatically different from Reagan? In a lot of ways, temperamentally, and in a lot of ways, even ideologically, going into that presidency of the Reagan presidency, he was. But nonetheless, you are going to carry forward. Look, I mean, I know we don't trust anything anywhere said by anyone ever, but folks, the economy's good. I'm sorry, the economy is good. We can pretend that now suddenly they're making up numbers. We can now pretend that suddenly, no, the economy is good. That's going to help the sitting president, and they're going to say they're going to continue that where they have had a role, and they have had a role, but also where they haven't had a role, because the economy is a thing that happens. And I mean, one of the things I always say is that there are elections where the election is almost predetermined. Like, it didn't matter who ran. A potted plant running in 1932 was going to win the election for the Democrats. That potted plant happened to be FDR, which sure helped things for the Democratic Party. But I mean, there was no given the circumstances, it's hard to imagine a Hoover victory in 1932. There are
Yeah.
times when that's the case. Now, obviously, the economy isn't so good that you're gonna say, they're gonna win, but you can't plausibly. They're trying, but are you better than you were 4 years ago? I don't know. I don't see freezer trucks lined up with bodies in them in major American cities. So in that sense, that's the toll. And can you blame Trump for the way his economy ended up? Kind of, but no, not entirely. Things happen, and you deal with them the best you can. And if a Democrat had had to deal with COVID, who knows what they would have done? They didn't. And you deal with the hand you're dealt. And I'm reminded of sort of Teddy Roosevelt and Bill Clinton, who both sort of lamented that they never had that great presidential moment to deal with. Meanwhile, you can look enviously at FDR, who had piles of them, right? I mean, it's what happens, and it's happenstance. And if you want to think about, like, 92 was a great what if. What about 76? What happens if Ronald Reagan wins the nomination in 76, or Ford wins in 70?
I think it's more
That,
likely that Ford would have won the election in 76. Yeah.
yeah, but like, if Reagan wins the nomination, if Reagan wins that in 1976, he's a failed one-term president.
Yeah.
Because the 18% inflation was not the responsibility, as evidenced by the fact that inflation started going up under Nixon, was up in the entire Ford administration, was up in the entire Carter administration, and was up in the first 2 years of Reagan's administration as well. And so sometimes things
Let me
happen.
push back on that, and only to say that Carter eventually landed on the right policy, but it took him about 4 years to do so. And I don't know if it would have taken Reagan 4 years to get there. So Reagan might have done, if he had taken immediate action to curb inflation in 77, let's say, you lose the midterms, but maybe the economy is recovering by 80. I'm just saying there's a scenario where Reagan might have, whereas I don't think Carter landed on the right policy until 78, 79, which meant that the tough sledding was going to be 81, 82. And
Right, but then at the same time, does Iran still take the hostages? Well, we're not talking about rational actors.
yeah,
Yes, they
yeah, I
do.
don't, that's a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
point.
yes, of course they do, because they are a
Well, but Reagan might have supported the Shah enough so that I mean, who knows? The Iranian Revolution might not have taken place. I don't know.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah. I don't
look,
know.
I don't
There's a
see
lot of
that,
what
but
yeah, I don't
right.
know.
Yeah, I mean, that's why speculative history is fun, because you can't be wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can certainly not be right.
Yeah,
The point being, right, that circumstances matter. And I argue that if Reagan or Ford, whoever wins and so that changes the 1980 election, it changes the dynamics. It allows, I mean, it means that Kennedy runs unfettered from his own party because there's no obvious nominee. It means that Carter's weakness never becomes a thing, because we never are
yeah.
familiar with him. I mean, if any of these changes, same thing, right? If Bush wins, then there are two possibilities in 92, in 96, right? That the Republicans continue their lead with a Bob Dole or something like that, or that the era of Democrat, I mean, just everything changes with one of these elections changing. And I think that the dynamics right now are, with a strong economy, with inflation largely under control. You can blame the
Yeah, but the problem
administration if
with
you want.
inflation, and this is where I think the perception matters more than the reality, which is that the even though the inflation rate has come down, prices are never going to go back to what they
Right,
were. We're not
right.
going to have deflation. And so when you're, ordering your meal at Taco Bell, which inflation is much worse in California when it comes to like fast food and stuff like that. I mean, when I travel outside of California, it really hits me like, oh, prices kind of have come down everywhere else. But as I said, like California is not competitive, but the cost of a, Taco Bell meal in California versus Texas is
Yeah,
pretty different.
no, absolutely. And it will be inflation. If Harris loses, I think you can probably pin it largely on overwhelmingly on inflation. I don't think it'll be
We're not
that many
selecting
of.
Josh Shapiro as their running mate.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the difference. I think Wallace has actually done exceptionally well. The high that he sort of got on early on was never going to sustain itself. But again, I mean,
But if she
when you
loses
are
Pennsylvania by, 5,000 votes, anything
but
could have.
right, but Shapiro's campaigning, right? He's doing the things. I don't think I don't think she's going to lose Pennsylvania. But look, this is how desperate a certain Trumpian Republicans became. Is that they now determined that defensive coordinators are not football coaches. They determined that lying about a guy's service record because they don't understand that you can retire at a different rank from what you served in your last rank. Those are losing things for them. Those are losing campaign
That stuff
things
is
when
so
you're.
in the weeds. I don't think it moves the
No,
needle.
but I mean they kept trying. They
Yeah,
kept trying. Whereas the sort of pathetic hum of we have nothing to do with Project 25 when your vice president wrote the preface for the book that they decided to pull,
yeah.
that becomes a real issue. And by the way, if either candidate made the wrong pick for vice president, I'm going to stand on the fact that I'll take Tim Walz over JD, whatever his name is today, any day of the week.
But if there's one criticism I have of your logic is that you are still somehow under the impression that logic matters.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. But
The idea that people are making rational decisions and about
well,
stuff
so and in my
that
in
that's
my
in any way
elections.
persuasive is like,
Right. In my presidential elections class now, that's one of the things I talk about. It's only with grad students this semester because we just for the things about a professor, right? I have a release for various reasons, so I can only teach the one. I'm teaching it with grad students because we needed a grad class. And we start every election, every class talking about what's happened in the current election. And the one thing that I'm constantly talking about is that got to separate signal from noise, right? And that a lot of it, some things matter more than others. And a good example of this is the vice presidential debate. Like vice presidential debates don't matter. The one striking moment from a vice presidential debate came in a campaign where the side that clearly won the vice presidential debate, 1988, got hammered in the election, didn't make a difference. People aren't. And the other thing you see is that when both sides are claiming victory and then both sides are claiming the other's claiming defeat, it's going to end up being a wash because no one's going to be like, that's the vice president. That's like same thing with like Harris going on Fox the other day. It was probably a net positive for her. The ultimate outcome was, she got humiliated by those who you'd expect to say that. Oh, she kicked his ass by those who you expect would say that. That's not going to make a difference,
but in
except
the
for.
signal noise analysis, I think I've only heard one person say something about that news appearance that I thought, oh, that might be a good point, which is that Harris must think that she's losing.
Why?
Because she must have some polling numbers that are telling her that she needs to do something, and that when
That
she,
is
you
that
know,
is that argument is so fucking stupid. I wouldn't trust it with power tools.
well, that came from an anonymous Democratic
Yeah,
consultant.
I don't care. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
look,
yeah.
look. Let me tell you, Democrats can be stupid.
Okay.
No, that is such a monumentally stupid number that I wouldn't trust it to drive my automobile.
Okay.
Argument because here's the thing: is that no, that you go into the enemy's den when you feel like you're doing well, when you feel like he's not doing well. Meanwhile, Grandpa Befuddle Pants is canceling clearly good campaign things when he's not just stopping and swaying to music that he's not authorized to play, right? So I mean, the idea that it's the same thing with people who were like, well, you're not asking for you're not asking for a rematch if you're winning. What? The
Well, but
entire history of.
again, and this is a double standard, I think, but it's an appropriate double standard. We expect that Harris is acting rationally, and thus we can engage in rational analysis of her actions. Whereas I don't know that we can look into Trump's actions and, say that they need to make sense.
Right, but that's become the asymmetry in the coverage as well. I think that, you know, the next person I hear talk about the liberal media, I think I might smack just on principle, because the media has been entirely rationalizing Trump because that's who Trump is. Whereas, you know, I mean, if the New York Times did a fraction of the number of Trump is old things that they did with the Biden is old situation, then this would be a very different election as well. But the reality is that Trump has been given an almost exemption from normalcy precisely because he's so abnormal.
Well, and that has been my criticism from the beginning, which is that I think that, by the way, I do think the media has a liberal and left and worse than I wish they had a liberal bias. I guess I would do what I think the media has especially the younger media members have a left bias. But
Nonsense. There is no evidence for that whatsoever.
well, I
None.
think the existence of the free press and what Barry Weiss has said about her experiences at the New York Times would suggest that liberals are having, especially old liberals, were having a difficult time. And
Barry Weiss, Barry Weiss is an honest broker. Are we serious about this? Are
yeah,
we having a serious conversation with Barry Weiss
yeah,
as an
her
honest broker?
her
Let's
podcast
start
is
a right
literally
wing
called Honestly.
let's start a right wing chop shop
But
fake
also, I would
university.
say the internal issues at the Washington Post as well. If you're talking about this sort of liberal establishment media, you've seen instances of both the New York Times and the Washington Post where um, people have said it got you know it got uncomfortable for the old
People have
liberals.
said. I always find that fascinating. We have a newspaper
Well,
owned
I
by Peter
listed
Thiel.
somebody in particular, but I think if you were to talk to the people who actually work in the newsrooms or know people who work in the newsrooms, when they describe what the internal Slack channels were like and why they got shut down and stuff like
Right, but who's in charge of? I mean,
they're willing
Peter
to.
Thiel. Peter Thiel runs the idea that Peter Thiel's newspaper, which is also, you know, his
What?
main thing. Who's he donating to? The bottom line is that, and also Wall Street Journal outsells both the Washington Post and the New York Times. And the vast majority of American newspapers are now owned by conglomerates, and that's the if people are reading newspapers anymore.
Yeah, and I would that's the other thing I guess I would say is that to the extent that there is a media establishment, by the way, like I think it's I don't think that there really is one in the or that it matters the way it used to, but it still matters that insofar as I still think of the New York Times and the Washington Post as, you know, representing the I don't know the center of American journalism, not ideologically, but just gravitationally, because in the same way that I know that we pay way too much attention to elite universities and not where most people go to college, but it still matters what goes on at the places that are aspirational, you know. So I don't know. Take that for what it's worth. The our next not to have the last word and move on, but our next big theme is what are the duties of a citizen right now um, in this election season, but also post-election. You're thinking about what does it mean to be a good American at the local, state, and national level. Trump victory or Harris victory, does that change what the duties of a citizen should be?
Don't threaten to murder your neighbors. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
we'll start there, right?
you know, the move to violence by some on the right um is a problem. Um and it, you know, you can people can try to sort of try to sane wash January 6th all they want. That was a problem. The fact that the vice president was not willing to go in a limo with Secret Service is a problem. The idea that, and I mean, I think that was most effective in the Allred debate the other day with Cruz is about running away and hiding in a broom closet is telling, and then the way things have changed subsequently to try to sane wash that narrative is pretty crazy. I mean, that would be the first thing, and you know the idea that these two things are not the same. Hillary, after winning the popular vote in 2016, took less than 24 hours to concede. It is now October 18th, 2024, and Trump still is insisting he won an election that he quite clearly lost based on corruption that did not exist. And it's amazing. It seems like every day another Republican voted 4 times, and we find that out. So yeah, I guess there was corruption in the 2020 election. Um, we have that on the other hand. Right now, if Harris wins, it is going to be Democratic responsibility to try to figure out a way to see if we can bridge these gaps. I don't necessarily think the answer is having a Republican in the cabinet, though. If you choose to, that's great. I hope but what I also would hope is that, yes, electoral college, Trump is 1-1 in the electoral college, but he's 0-2 in popular vote. And I expect he's going to be 0-3 in popular vote and 1-2 in the electoral college. I hope the Republican Party gets behind normal, sane standard bearers again. And I hope those normal, sane standard bearers step up.
Yeah, I just don't
Um,
know where they come from. I was uh and again, this is anecdotal, but I used to be the advisor for the college Republicans and we used to be deeply involved in partisan politics. And part of what we did was we would sort of recruit the next people as they would start to move up the ladder, right? And hopefully engaging in mentorship and but also a lot of vetting, like you're a bad person, you're in this for the wrong reasons. Let's let you do something that doesn't matter. Whereas when you would find somebody who was like a good person and like you'd say, okay, let's put you on the track that's going to keep testing you, and if as you pass these tests, we're going to keep promoting you. But one of the things that I haven't seen is when that system on the Republican side essentially got just blown up. Um, I don't know. You have to find somebody who existed in a universe before 2016.
yeah,
Uh,
there's a
who
long and
hasn't beclowned themselves,
right. There
It,
is
it
a
almost
long
it almost reminds me of like Weimar Germany, who retired in 2015. you know,
Right.
uh,
There is a long and storied, glorious and fun history of trolling the opposition in American politics. The problem has become that now trolling seems to be American politics. And obviously, old man shakes fist at cloud, social media, but social media exists. And
yeah,
so lamenting that is, lamenting NIL, lamenting all the things that people
right.
lament
Abraham
in this
Lincoln
world.
wrote anonymous letters to newspapers insulting his political opponents.
I mean, the 1800 election was a cavalcade of personal insults.
Right. John Quincy
Um,
Adams, saying that he had been a pimp for the Russian czar, or that he had gaming tables and gambling furniture because he had a chess set, right? Like these are
Ma,
all,
ma, where's my pa, right? There's a long history of
yeah,
this in the context of larger campaigns where one, you let surrogates do it. Two, it isn't your literal personality. Like, I mean, I hope we never reach a point. Barack Obama is a master troller. I hope we never reach a point though where at 2 a.m. we're getting block quote, all cap tweets from him. And I don't. That's not what politics are. It's an element. There's always been that element, right? Like in your the Goldwater, in your heart you know he's right, and then Lyndon Johnson responding, but in your guts you know he's
that's
nuts.
he's
I
nuts.
mean,
Yeah.
there's always been that, and then there's always been the gotcha line in debates. And frankly, I think that in recent years, both parties have gotten so, but I think Trump is also completely uncontrollable, and I think there's something that people like about that to an extent because he's not packaged. But I think one of the things we're realizing is no, actually having someone that you have a little bit of control over that has some campaign discipline, that has some personal discipline, is
Or who actually
stunning.
cares about the institutions of government, I guess would be the, or
Yeah,
just
and
knowledge of them, you know.
well, and what do you think about this sort of? This might be moving a little far afield, but what do you think about this whole story that they're going to 25th Amendment Trump within like 20 minutes of him taking the oath of office?
I don't know. I mean, he does seem to be in a cognitive decline. But I don't know if it's as pronounced as what happened to Biden, but he's not a young man. And he does
So I
not.
would argue, I would argue that the only way it's not more pronounced than what happened to Biden is because he started off on such a low threshold that we expect
Right.
him to be pooping himself.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and but um I don't know. I just I don't in a way, no. I mean it, but I guess never say never in the Trump world. You know, like I
yeah,
like
yeah,
you're
that's
dealing with a
the
bunch of people who don't care about the institutions of government at all, and don't care about, you know, what's best for the country in the long term at all. I don't. Who knows what kind of fantasies are fueling their decision making?
well, and you know, in this class, because it's a grad class, I'm able to assign a bunch of good reading. So I assigned Lewis Gould's book on the modern American presidency. Then I assigned Bill Luchtenberg's book, the White House Looks South, on FDR,
Yeah,
Truman, LBJ, and their relationship with the South.
great book.
Then Margaret O'Mara's Pivotal Tuesdays on four elections. That's really quite
I don't
good.
know. Yeah, I don't
She's
know that book.
the University of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and she does a good capsule history of four, I think Minnesota, of four elections,
Okay,
ending in 92, 68, I believe 48 and 1912, but I could be mistaken. We read Zach Carabel's book on the 48 election.
that's good too.
Um,
You know what's a great book is I don't know if you ever read Andrew Bush's, because they had that series that was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
on
No, no, I
film.
was gonna let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
Andrew Bush's book on the 1980 election from that
Right.
Kansas series.
Yeah.
And then we're finishing up with Jeremy Surrey's book, The Impossible Presidency.
Yeah.
Um,
So you're
and
talking
then
about two of my colleagues from Ashbrooks. Surrey and Bush are both work with me
yeah,
at
yeah,
Ashland. Yeah.
and you know, those are all
Both great guys, by the way.
yeah,
Like,
I
would love both of them. They're
well, I
super.
should reach out to Surrey, especially since he's, you know, but so they're getting to read, and then their project, rather than a seminar paper, is they're getting an election. They picked an election, and they are going to now, based on everything we've read, use that as a model, not for a paper, but for a presentation with a portfolio of sources. And you know, to that's their election. And I think the good thing about that, one, taking a historical view, so I'm not letting anything after 2000. My view is that if my politics come out with a certain amount of critical detachment on Reagan, well, that's rather different than that's why I don't teach. Um, I now get into the early 2000s, but my survey will always have a 20-year lag because
Yeah.
then you can't accuse me. One, then it, you know, it becomes more muddled. Now we are talking about the current election, but again, I can take such a dispassionate and frankly cynical view that I don't think my students, you know, they'll say the things, and I have a wide range of ideologies, including a good number of, well, I've always been conservative, but students, and then I have a couple who I think are probably clearly, you know, going to vote for the Republican no matter what. I also have students from, you know, local students who obviously, I mean, that's the one thing. Like, there are no signs on my yard. Because one, what would be the point? And two, it would. I mean, I'm maybe I'm paranoid. I'm a good sized guy who can handle myself, but if a dude shows up with a gun, not much I can do. And I'm not. We're not putting up signs because I don't want to target. I don't really care, but I don't want to target my family. I don't want to target my home.
Yeah.
And that this will be another one of the tests is that I don't know if you know this or not. Odessa is the socialist paradise of the Midland Odessa cities because we voted for Trump with about 72%, whereas Midland is 74% Trump.
Yeah.
If those numbers drop to 68 or 69, on the one hand, obviously landslide type numbers. On the other hand, it'll show those voters just not showing up. I don't think he'll lose I don't think Harris will gain numbers of votes. I think voting will be down, um, because I'm not seeing, again, these sort of stupid metrics that are totally anecdotal, but like I am not seeing the number of signs for Trump that I've seen in the past.
Do you think foreign policy matters at all in this election? Do you think
Yeah, but
anything?
in roundabout ways. I'm
Ukraine
alarmed.
and Israel in particular, and then
Yeah.
let's do Ukraine, Israel, China, and tariffs. I don't know.
Um, Tariffs is the one that should make the biggest difference. It won't, because it's a nonsense policy that isn't thought out at all, and it's based on lies. China probably should play a bigger role as well. It won't, because you got to get too deep in the weeds about global geopolitical things and regional actors and all that. That won't matter. Look, it's the two places that are at war that'll make a difference. And I'm frankly alarmed that a war with a clear aggressor, who historically we would be skeptical of, is getting as much sort of white noise as we're getting about it, to sort of blind us to what the realities of that are with regard to Trump's relations with Putin and others. I look, if people were being truly isolationist and we don't want to be involved, we don't want to spend money, da 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 da, fine. But they were being that way when it was just sending equipment that we weren't using over there. Forget about money. Ukraine doesn't have to be the good guy for the people who invaded Ukraine to be the bad guy. Geopolitics aren't based on your moral compass necessarily, though I'm going to be a hypocrite when I bring it up to the Palestine issue, where that is an issue that brings about such an enormous moral compass for its people who support for it that it's almost impossible to get involved. On the Substack, I have a piece I want to write, that is literally going to be called, the subtitle is going to be, "In which I try not to self-immolate my career," because it's going to do that worst of all things. It's
By
going
the
to
way,
try to,
isn't self-immolation the only kind of immolation you can do?
I think, isn't it just immolation, setting
I
something
don't
on
know.
fire?
I think immolation just means I've lit. So I don't know. I
Maybe,
don't think you can
I don't know.
immolate someone
I,
else.
maybe I'll be signing up for the redundancy department of repetition. I don't know.
Are you saying that
But
I'm redundant? That I repeat myself? That I say
yeah,
over and over again?
exactly. Yeah. I think on that one, the the key for, again, it's relying on, we're talking about sanity all the way around, including on the part of voters themselves. I can't imagine Trump gaining any votes from people who are saying that the Biden administration is engaging in genocide or genocide by proxy or whatever, and without getting into the merits of that argument, because it is a complicated one. But rather, will they vote third party? And I don't know what you feel about that. I would love, by the way, to see a legitimate third party emerge, but I'd like to see it emerge organically. I'd like to see it emerge by, you know what, we're winning some local elections. Let's take it to the state level. We won some representatives. We won this, because that's how I'm going to trust a third party movement, not Jill Stein, in 3 of the last 4 elections, deciding that her ego, as well as whatever her other involvements are, warrant her running for president. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Obviously, it's a free country, for now. But I would say that, that's where those votes will go. And will that make the difference in a place like Michigan? I just simply don't know. But I think that there's going to be a little bit of protection from that in Pennsylvania. I think that Shapiro would counter some of the votes. And look, I don't want to. The other thing I don't want to make it sound like is that I'm dismissing or disparaging the argument of those people on the left who are really appalled by what's happening in Israel. I think that one can be appalled by October 7th and recognize that history doesn't start on October 7th. I think one can believe that Israel has a right to defend itself. I also think that one can have expectations for how a country defends themselves, and what it means to defend yourself, and what it means in terms of that, as oxymoronic as it seems, there are rules of war, or there should be, and there are also ethical standards that we can hold, especially our allies to. So I think it's long and complicated and difficult, and the reason there will be immolation is because I probably will satisfy no one on either side. Especially adding in the little soupçon of crackdown on protests, much of which seems to me to be perfectly legitimate, whether you agree or not with the substance. But I don't know if it'll be enough of a difference maker, except for the possibility of third parties Stein and all that. But again, my fundamental argument is I think that Harris is going to win by margins greater than that.
I think you're probably right. I'm trying to wrap my brain around the idea of who, what kind of normal person is voting for Trump? What is the best argument that a normal person would make for voting for Trump? And I did this sort of same exercise. One of my friends who's a Trump voter actually asked me privately and sincerely, like, why would anybody vote for Harris? What's the sort of best argument for voting for Harris? And I think I did a pretty good job of laying out, like, and in almost every case it was stability in decision making in these various areas. Um, but I've been trying to, I don't know if I have as an articulate of an answer when it comes to and that's why I was kind of excited by this, Jonah Goldberg framework of like, um, people voting on the best case scenario for Trump versus the worst case scenario for Trump. So I'm trying to wrap my head around like, what are the elements that a normal person looks at this ballot and says, there's a best case version of Trump that I think is more likely than the worst case version of Trump. And what does that entail? I don't know if you have
Yeah.
a better answer for that than I
Yeah,
do.
I mean, I think my argument, if I were a Republican and I were voting for Trump either enthusiastically or holding my nose, is there are certain Republican values and Republican platform things, even if Trump doesn't bother writing a platform, that I believe will endure because I believe that working with a Republican Congress or as close to a Republican Congress as we can get will now allow those things to happen, and that Congress will make sure that these things are carried forward in legislation that we know Trump will sign. And those would include particular views on taxes. Those would include particular views on the role of and size of the bureaucracy, which people use as a bad word, doesn't have to be a bad word. The role of government. I think that also many of them have convinced themselves, because the irony of foreign policy is that if we've learned anything over 200 and however many years now, 250 years, it's that we don't really have liberal and conservative foreign policy tend to be weapons that you use against the enemy. But in all honesty, we either come together at the water's edge or these become politics of convenience. I mean, a country, one country attacks another country, and we do not believe that was just, and we do not believe it serves America's interest. Well, that seemed to be a pretty effective argument for George H.W. Bush in 1990. And so, there are other scenarios where it's the Republicans who are embracing Ukraine. So in a lot of ways, I think that we do see in terms of our team. And it's not surprising that I am more likely to vote Republican the lower down the ticket it gets, not because these offices are small, but because they're the ones that impact our lives. And if I'm going to vote, when I've voted Republican in my life, it has been local offices where, despite the fact, I mean, the thing that amuses me the most, right, are like the person running for sheriff in Midland and talking about being pro-choice. That's got nothing to do with being sheriff
Right.
in Midland. When local politicians try to turn their candidacy for school board into their mini run for Senate,
Right.
they're likely to lose my support, right? So if someone is running on a liberal Senate campaign to be a school board member in Odessa, and the other person is talking about what they're going to do with the schools, that Republican, even though these are theoretically nonpartisan in some cases, is more likely to get my vote. When I was growing up, where there was a father of a friend of mine who was a rock rib Main Street banker Republican who continued to run for a particular local office. I don't even remember what it was. And I always voted for him because I knew he was a good man. I knew he was Peter Lovely. If PJ, you ever hear about this, he was a good man who was going to represent Newport as best he could. And whatever disagreements I had with him, whoever the newest fly-by-night Democrat who just simply was, I want the position, wasn't going to get my support. And I think that in that sense, those people who believe republicanism means something are going to maybe hold their nose, maybe not, and vote for Trump. I just don't know if you're going to get that anymore. And I worry about a world in which we have sort of both sides to the point where Trump's criminal violations are seen as political prosecution, whereas Trump getting up and saying, I am going to prosecute these 20 people irrespective, becomes seen as legitimate. And it does sometimes feel like Trump is running to stay out of jail. And it does sometimes seem that he is going to try to get. So I mean, you know what's been nice about the last few years is not waking up every single morning and wondering what the crazy story is. Not if there's going to be a crazy story,
Yeah.
what the crazy story is going to be from the White House. Now, unfortunately, the story has come from the same place, so there's still been the crazy.
Well,
Um,
this is why I feel like if there has been my big criticism of how the media treated Trump is that they did not treat his crazy statements as statements, even though that's what they were. And that it would have been far more effective if it had simply been reported that do straight reporting on here's the world crisis, and then just say exactly what President Trump said without any commentary. And I feel like that would have been a far more effective way of demonstrating over the long term just how weird this is because they treated it as if his tweets were not presidential statements. They were.
Right. Well, and that's the thing when people have sort of weighed in and said things like the problem is that the left takes Trump literally and they don't take him seriously. What does that mean? He's either the president of the United States or a candidate for the president of the United States. If we have to think that this dude is speaking in puzzles and metaphors and we need to figure it out because we need to take him seriously, that's
Yeah.
actually not taking him seriously.
Yeah,
And if you're not taking
that's my point, right? That is my point. That we the way the media treated him led people to believe that fantasy could exist in reality. That somehow that and oh sorry, our fact checker just weighed in. So if we had said anything that required fact checking, he would have been able to do it for us. His name's Jake Peterson. There he is. But yeah, we do need to sort of wrap things up. And sorry, Jake. Let's try and say some things that require fact checking in these last 10 minutes. Do you have a oh, I know something I wanted to circle back to that I didn't hit hard enough, which is the role of a historian as historian versus the role of historian as public intellectual. How do you see those two different um, hats that you wear?
they're certainly blending. It is a fact of my biography, and this is something I oftentimes have to say in the context of like various university politics and who I represent and who I don't. It is a fact of my biography that I'm a professor where I am a professor. And when I write something, and I write a lot for various media, and do a lot of media appearances, I try to make it clear that one, I have a sort of kind of self-deprecating line when it comes to predictions, right? Which is that as a historian, I have a hard enough time predicting the past, so don't take me too seriously on predicting the future. Um, and
My
and
line, by
and
the way, is I always say, I'll tell you in 20 years what I think about what's happening right now.
Right. And so I'll point out where I've been wrong. I mean, I certainly thought the 2007 Patriots were going to go undefeated. I certainly thought they were going to win that Super Bowl. I said in arguably the biggest media landscape in South Africa, I said, well, Trump's a clown. There's zero chance he wins the nomination. That was obviously wrong. Like so
Well,
many
or
people were wrong.
another good line on this regard is that history is all the times that political science was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. There is an element of that. I just, you know, uh, I think that you do your best to think. I think of something that Lon Hamby, our advisor, told us. When we in the Contemporary History Institute at Ohio University, he had a line that really has always stuck with me, which is that you can think historically about events that happen today, and you can think very unhistorically or ahistorically about events that happened 100 years ago. And let's face it, there are a number of historians who make their career based on that problem. I try. It also depends on my audience, right? When I'm in front of students, I have an obligation that I don't have in my Substack or in an op-ed or whatever. In the same way that there are circumstances where I have to be 1000% apolitical, as you know. I mean, the gig that people are most interested that I do is that I'm Permian High's football broadcaster. And there have been a couple of times when I say things that aren't even vaguely political. So one time, 2 years ago, one of my better lines, it's sort of my strength as I come up with these bizarre things off the top of my head. I said that kid looked like he looked as confused as a communist at a Walmart. I don't think that's at all political.
Yeah,
But
that's a
I
good
got a
line.
text saying you can't say that kind of thing. Which is, hey, fine.
Okay.
In other words, you got to know the gig. And
Yeah.
there are circumstances where I have a responsibility to be completely apolitical. And then there are circumstances where, as a historian and as I think a reasonably good one, certainly a well-published one, I can make historical conclusions that might have ideological implications. But those could include, by the way, something I said a couple of weeks ago, which is that Herbert Hoover, all the talk about Hillary Clinton being the most qualified person ever to run for president, she was enormously qualified. But I mean, Herbert Hoover,
Yeah.
George H.W. Bush, and others. But Herbert Hoover becomes yoked with a depression that you can't really plausibly claim he was responsible for,
Yeah.
right? And if Al
Well,
Smith, if
I
Al Smith, I mean, he was Secretary of Commerce prior to that, but I mean, you can't really blame him. You can say he didn't do well enough. You can say he didn't, but the larger point being
let me
this.
not defend Hoover for a second. I would say he's not responsible for the crash. I'd say he is responsible for the first bad decisions that led to the 10-year long depression.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the larger point being that from an
Yeah, no, you're right.
ideological van, if I was going into all my classes being like
Just say
starting with the New
crash,
Deal and
not
everything,
depression, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. If you, but even there, like I don't blame Hoover, and so as a good, supposedly good liberal, ought I not be saying that Roosevelt saved us from, well, the depression's still kind of going on in 38, 39, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
can argue about the effect. I think there were some good things. The larger point being, though, that as a historian, I also can take a 35,000-foot view on a Carter, on a Bill Clinton. So when people are like, well, but if Bill Clinton was on Epstein's plane, prosecute him. Like, I don't, those aren't the kinds of things that I care about, whether or not I voted for the guy, right? These aren't, as a historian, I can think historically. I can be critical
So
of.
let me compare just to our other big example is like when I'm doing history, I'm a an Alonzo Hamby student just like you and just like Tom, and I think that we all do the same thing. Essentially, we were all taught to do the same thing, which is you read everything, then you take everything and you tell that story, and who it pleases and who it
Right.
angers, you just say, well, I don't know. This is the story I had to tell because this I read everything and this is what happened. And
Well,
then
and this is an example of one we talked about, right? I mean, uh, there are interpretations that Andrew Bush makes that indicate to me certain elements of his, but I mean, it's a good book. It is
yeah.
a good book that I can draw a lot about, and where I disagree, that's what historians do. And the thing I like about it is that, except for the people in the profession who are jerks, and there are those, generally speaking, we respect those differences. We respect those sort of approaches. Again, you, me, and Tom, even if you and Tom tend to have similar voting, very different ideologically on a whole range of issues, and yet we, as historians and as friends, we can get along and look beyond that. And I worry that the tone of American politics these days has entered a place where that becomes more and more impossible, because even if, like, the idea of living color, singing about the cult of personality, even if that's always sort of existed with us, it seems like it's become a thing in a way now that is just harmful to so many institutions. And in the long run, by the way, it's harmful to I think it's harmful to the Republican Party. And I think not having a healthy Republican Party is a bad thing for the United States. And I think that I would hope that and one historical thing I want to say, though, is that when it's worth pointing out that if my prediction comes true, that Kamala Harris is going to kick his ass, I don't think it creates this massive generational sea change. Let's think about some landslides in American history. 1930, 1920, maybe could have, but didn't. But that was an epic ass kicking. But it ultimately didn't. Why? Well, because of things that happen within 12 years, you have a Democratic ascendancy that lasts for a generation. So 32 and 36 kind of do. But then let's look at the other major landslides in American history.
Well,
1960,
1892, 1900 for that matter, right?
right,
Like,
but
yeah.
19
Uh,
so into more relevant
right,
contemporary
right.
things,
Yeah.
I would argue. So I mean, 1964 is an epic landslide. Within 4 years, LBJ is going to be out of office within 4 years and 2 months. He's going to be out of office, and Nixon is going to win. He's going to win a landslide in 1972. Epic landslide. Does that
Yep.
change things? Well, Carter wins in 1976. Not that
Right.
much of one. So you have Reagan in 1984. Within 8 years, Clinton takes office. I don't think a landslide is going to mean, I'm not arguing that there's going to be a sea change. I am arguing that in this election, I think she's going to kick his ass. I do. I think it's going to be now, again, define your terms, right? I think she's going to win by 6 to 7% in the popular vote. Is that customarily a landslide? Let's let other people, let's let the politician, the political scientists be wrong about that.
Yeah.
She's going to win more than, I think, comfortably more than 300 electoral college votes, probably closer to 324. And so that's my prediction. And if it's wrong, you can personalize it if you want, but it's just a wrong prediction. Settle the fuck down.
Yeah.
Like it's just a wrong prediction in a maelstrom of wrong predictions. And anyone who's making those criticisms has also been wrong, especially about recent elections.
Well, let's bring in the other example I wanted to bring in was somebody who we both also, I don't know if you were ever his student, but Jeffrey Herf, I was one
Yeah.
of his students. Um, he at the time was at the New Republic as well and would describe what he called his different hats that he would wear, public intellectual versus historian. And as a historian, he's very much like Hamby, read everything, get everything right, tell me what happens, fear without fear or favor. You just like write it. But then he said, uh, and I think Stephen Miner was a little bit in this camp too, which is that as a public intellectual, any statement, I think that it was Herf who said this, any statement is worth a vigorous overstatement. Uh, and thus we need to like cut a pretty wide berth for a public intellectual because the role of a public intellectual is that you're using ideas like playthings and you're doing it in order to elicit a response. And you want the most vigorous response to your vigorous overstatement in order to move public debate on a particular issue. And that's why I don't condemn the vigorous overstatement of a public intellectual.
Yeah.
Um, and the only potential downside, I think, is that when that stuff enters kind of the real world, some of those vigorous overstatements, or if people who write these things as vigorous overstatements end up being, brought into the Trump White House to try and overthrow the government. Yeah, I think there are probably some people at Claremont who who were like, it's okay to employ some people who are like a little bit of a crank, you know, um, who have some original ideas because they're a little bit wacky, but these people should not be put in charge of anything. Like, you know,
Yeah, and look, here's the thing, right? We can have a follow-up to this conversation in a few weeks and see how it goes, see how it went. I think, and I know we're getting, they want us to wrap it up, so I'll
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
sort of say my concluding thing, which is that I could be wrong. I am doing my best, granted, as a liberal, guilty as charged, right? And I think I'll take the record of liberalism. I could be wrong. Trump could win this election. Because here's the thing that I'm going to say. Trump won the election in 2016. Based on our system, whatever my problems with the electoral college, I love the criticism that like, well, he hates the Constitution because I also don't like the 2/3 clause, and I'm not a big fan of the Prohibition Amendment. All parts of the Constitution as well, right? Like if you like every single element about the Constitution at all times, you're actually being remarkably a foolish consistency, I would argue. But it is the system that we have. And I could be wrong. I was certainly wrong in 2016, and I was in good company. I could be wrong. Trump could win this election. There could be a change in the next couple of weeks. The way I see the rhythm of this election, the way I see Trump not getting any new voters, I think she's going to kick his ass. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I think Senate is likely to stay in the hands is likely to go to Republicans. So give me the same level of grief or praise if I'm right or wrong on that. And I think Democrats might take the House. That's my prediction. If by making a prediction in an environment where we're making predictions, where I have my pundit's hat on, it makes me a bad person, then let whoever wants to sling their arrows sling their arrows. But I want to see them have the ball sack to write a similar piece about what they think is going to happen. Because if you're not in the ring, I'm going to give you a version, an Axl Rose version of Teddy Roosevelt's statement. Either get in the ring, motherfucker, or shut up.
I want to know if our gravelly voiced John Brackney wants to say anything before, or if he wants me to wrap things up. But for those of you, nope, he says he's good. He is under the weather and doesn't want to be recorded. So I will do the duties of host and wrap things up. We'd like to thank Professor Derek Katzum for being on the show. And as always, we will look forward to having you guys listen in on the next show. Thanks.